Thank you all for joining. My name is Nabil. I'll be your host for the evening. I'll give you a very quick introduction to the Essence for Agility meetup group, and then I'll quickly introduce the actual event that we have tonight. So Essence for Agility for the newcomers is a community aimed to explore Essence, which is a standard that describes all the practices and methods within Agile to better enable us to pick the right set of practices for our context, regardless of which method they belong to. It also helps us understand the health of our ways of working or an endeavor or project. So it's very useful as a sort of a health check as well. It has other applications. We can use it on the organizational level, on the team level, and others, I'm sure. So the team level is what we'll be exploring today. Tonight, the title of the event is Essence Exploration Teams. So we'll be exploring the many use cases that we can use Essence for on the team level. Our lovely speaker, Simon, he will be giving us the overview and the demonstrations. Before I hand over, just some quick ground rules. Please try to remain muted at all times to minimize disturbance. Please do use the chat system while the talk is going on. Always lovely to see the back and forth chats. If you have any questions throughout the event, also feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure Simon will try to get to them, and we'll have time at the end as well to field any questions that you have. Other than that, relax, sit in and enjoy the show. And I'm going to hand over to Ivar first, because he has prepared an introduction for us as well.
Hello, everyone. Very welcome to this very first Essence Exploration meetup. Many people have asked us to explain what Essence is and its use cases. This is not easy because there are so many different kinds of users who get benefits from Essence, and there are so many use cases of interest to these users. It's actually easier to say what it's not. It's not yet another method or framework competing with existing such methods and frameworks. So it doesn't compete with safe or dead or less or whatever you want to have, and probably not with anything you have at home. It's something that many people, including myself, now thinks that it will make these other frameworks better in so many ways. For instance, Jeff Sutherland, co-founder of Scrum, says that Essence is the key to success. Not just Jeff says so, more and more methodologists are now embracing Essence. I'm not able to tell you which ones are very close to publications, but there are. Last meetup we had was about Spotify model essentials. So there are many more coming. Many large companies are currently adopting Essence to build their own way of working, to achieve a better way to work with methods. Many of them has actually worked with famous methods and come to a level where they feel, well, we have learned something, but now we want to own it ourselves. Essence addresses many big issues that we face in working with methods. For instance, the methods war. We have had a methods war for 50, 60 years, since 1970s. And there is no difference between these wars over all this time. They are not like marketing wars or sales war. They are more like religious wars, because they have to do about the intellectuals, how you think about things. Another crazy thing is that we are dependent on gurus. So every framework has some guru behind it who more or less controls what is in the framework, what is being taught. There is no common ground between all these. The only thing we have in common is basically the alphabet, which is unbelievable. We have been working so long. methods are just theory. By that I mean we teach it, we create websites of it, we have all kinds of support for method. But when it comes to then implement the method in an organization, there is a big gap. There is a big gap between learning and doing. This is also a handicap. Many people go back to old behavior once the consultants have disappeared. I mean, there is, of course, consultants that can bridge the gap, but the reality is there are not many of them that are good. And they have, those who are good, they have to teach very elementary things instead of focus on what really is difficult and essential. And finally, practices are not reusable, meaning they are basically locked into prison, the method. And so you cannot take practices from one method and use it in another easily without redesigning. The value proposition is a huge number of use cases. There is more engineering, less craft. It's still a craft, but the craftsmen can work on a more qualified level. You get the forever learning organization because you build up a practice library, an ecosystem, and this ecosystem is maintained by people who are the experts of it, namely the founders of particular practices. Teams and teams of teams select their own method from an ecosystem of practices. And there are many similar things. It's not just for software, it's for basically all kinds of things. There are now essentialized, the frameworks essentialized. We call it decentralized when we let a framework be standing on top of Essence. The journey has been very long. We started seriously working on this in 2006. And Simon will soon tell you where we are. So over to you, Simon.
All right, thank you, Ivar. Thank you, Nabil. Welcome. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I think we've got every part of the day represented here. So as Ivar says, my name is Simon Gervin. I work with Ivar Jakobsen International as a principal consultant focused on Essence. And that means doing things like this, but also means working with people to essentialize practices, working with clients to help them apply Essence, and also working on training. And a lot of it is about spreading the word. So it's something that, you know, this audience knows quite a lot about. So I'm going to assume that Essence is something that you're all, at least to some extent, familiar with. I'm going to assume that agility and Agile is something that you're to some extent familiar with as well. And what I want to really help you do today is two main things. The first, to give you a bit of a better understanding of how Essence can help, especially with teams. And I'd like to make sure that by the end of this hour or so, you'll have at least one, but maybe even 5 explicit, specific, concrete things that you can take away with you and use with your teams tomorrow, if you've got teams. So I'm going to try and make it quite practical. I'd like to make it quite interactive. Obviously, depending on where you are in your day, you might have other things going on. In the UK where I am, it's tea time. If you've got younger kids, it's probably kids' bedtime. So I appreciate not everybody can take part in any interactive sessions, but I'm going to try and make it easy. I'm going to try and run some polls as part of it. Please use the chat and unmute in the bits that I'm trying to get some feedback. But I want to try and give you a bit of a feel for what it's like to use Essence in day-to-day team activities. And we've got a few different scenarios that I'll talk you through. So let me share my screen first, and then there's a little bit of talking, and then we're going to jump into the first exercise really quite quickly. I'm going to use a tool called Essence in Practice Team Space, which is here. Everything I'm going to talk to you about, though, I've also put on a mural template. So if you want to put this stuff into practice tomorrow, then I'll drop the template link into the chat. Which I think is that one, and you should be able to get this stuff giving you some value with any luck. So let me start. Actually, I think I might have showed it might have been the wrong link. If somebody's floating around, that's the link to the actual Essence. Let me, it's the template link I wanted to share, not that link. So let me stop that, because that's supposed to be a template. Let me sort of link out later, and I'll move on to where I was going to be. So if you've accepted a membership to our mural, we'll need to kick you out, I'm afraid. That is a template as well, never mind. The good news is that's the first and only error in the presentation already accomplished. Okay, so let's move on to safer ground with PowerPoint, shall we? This is what we're going to cover today. We've got 5 different scenarios, 5 different things that you could have with your teams. And we're going to cover each of them and show how Essence and essentialized practices can help your teams improve as a result. So one is a basic health check. We're going to show how Essence can help you be a better coach, can give you better tips for coaching, how it can help your team understand and put more focus on the values or principles that are important to them. We're going to show how it can help you understand how you apply a practice and explore it in a bit more detail. And then particularly how you can inspect and adapt your practice or in fact, parts of your practice. So that's the outcomes. Those are the 5 things that you should be able to take away in action. And the reason we're doing it is to try to make our teams better. And there's 2 models that I'd like to share with you about how we can make our teams more productive. The first is this one. This is the Essence Infinity Loop, continuous double loop learning. And there's 2 really important words, well, 3 really. Infinity and continuous, really important, because this is something that is not a one-stop. And the second word that's important is learning, because high-performing teams don't get to being high-performing and stop. They get there and they continue to learn. And that's why both these loops are really important. I'll not go through it in detail, but just briefly, the left-hand loop, which goes in anti-clockwise direction, is the learning cycle. How do we learn things that are new or different? So find out about it, you explore it, you adopt it, you get some training, you maybe adapt it or evolve it a little bit. And then on the right-hand side, there's a delivery loop. So that's your familiar Deming or Stewart cycle, plan, do, check, act, or if you prefer, plan, do, study, act. Iterative delivery, doing something in an empiric way, going around, planning and adapting and so on. Now, the problem is what typically goes wrong is that we don't do both of these loops in a continuous way. We typically focus on learning once and then delivering. Now, this is what Ivar talks about as the Achilles heel of method adoption, because this is a behavior that's really almost encouraged by a lot of methods. So we typically go on a course, maybe to get a certificate, we learn something, and then sometime later, if we're lucky, it's the next day, but often it's a few weeks later, we start trying to apply that practice. But we haven't got the support, as Ivar was saying, to go back around this learning loop. And the problem then is that people come along and real life comes along, and all the things that sounded so simple when you were sitting the exam or sat in the classroom are all of a sudden not so simple, not so easy to navigate. And what we need to be doing really in that situation is going back around our learning loop, reinforcing what we were taught, applying it to what we now know of the situation, and then that reinforces our delivery loop again. And that's typically not what happens, but it's what Essence makes a little bit easier. And I'll show you why that's true. The second model I want to share with you is one that's a little bit cheeky, but it's from a book that's coming out next month, which is my book as it happens. But in it, we talk about Agile leadership. So the book's called Agile from First Principles. So it's really helping people understand Agile and what it's all about. And we talk about the things that are beneficial for leaders to want to achieve with their Agile teams. So again, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but especially things like intrinsic motivation. So mastery, purpose, autonomy, psychological safety, being trusted and having empowered teams. These are all really important in Agile teams. And what we'll find as we go through these exercises is that whilst the exercise itself doesn't necessarily result in these outcomes, the facilitation is what matters, and poorly facilitated exercises can result in poorly led and teams that are not got the right conditions for agility. Better facilitation and well-facilitated exercises can really help maximize some of these things that we really want to see in Agile teams. So I'll point out where we're going to find that in these exercises as we go along. And if you want to buy the book, it's out in the 19th of May. First exercise then is I think one of my favorites is probably the simplest Essence exercise, and yet it's one of the most powerful games you can play with Essence. And it's a team health check. So I'm going to show you on this board. So what we have here, and I appreciate you can't see the detail, but don't worry, is that's our Essence alphas, all 7 of them, and all 41 of their states. And with this game, it's as simple as assessing what state you're in for your endeavor. Now, the beauty with Essence, as Eva was saying in the introduction, is that Essence is not a framework in its own right that you bring in place of something like Safe or Scrum or Less or Kanban or whatever. Instead, it gives you an insight and a set of perspectives on whatever it is you're already doing to help you apply that practice or that method better. So the nice thing with this game is it works at all levels. It works if you've got a single team, say building a component or a feature. It works if you've got a whole program. It works if you've got an organization. The same rules apply and the same exercise works really well. And the rules basically are identify what scope do you want to assess. So what's the thing that you're thinking about? What's your endeavor? Decide which of the 7 alphas you want to include. You don't have to use them all. So for example, it might be that you want to really get a handle on where the health of your team is with regards to its way of working, and that might be all. Or you might want to use all 7. And then what we do is we use the checklists to decide what the health of our endeavor is. And the gameplay works as you assess a state. So this is one of the states. So the first one in opportunity is identified, and we move it across to the left if we've achieved that state, and we go through each of the cards in turn at deciding which state we're in. And we do that for as many of the things as we want. Now, what that looks like in practice is really quite interesting. So if we just come into this one as an example, so you can read it. Here we've got stakeholders. So we might decide we're beginning to think about stakeholders for whatever our endeavor is, and we've got 3 questions to ask ourselves. Have we identified our stakeholder groups? Are the key stakeholder groups represented? And are the responsibilities defined? And thinking about facilitation, you don't need to facilitate this. You literally would either hand the cards, these exist in cards, you either hand the cards to your team or point them at a mural or point them at TeamSpace and ask them to assess their health. It's a self-organizing, self-running game, so it really empowers that self-organization element. But what it also does is it asks some quite interesting questions. So, are your stakeholder groups identified? Well, it's a yes/no question, but how are they identified? How could you evidence that? Where would you see that? How would you know if they changed? So it starts to ask quite a few questions. And then let's say we've achieved those 3 questions and we think about the next one, and we've got 4 more things to ask ourselves. And some of them work on building, so we've got responsibilities defined. Well, the next stage is agreeing those responsibilities. So the way this game works is as a team, you work through the different alphas that you are interested in until you get to a state where you can't agree that you've achieved all the states, all the checklists, and then that's where you work to next. So what's really interesting with this is, as I say, it works with any type of endeavor. It works at team level, it works at program or organization level, and generally, it raises more questions than it answers. So when you start to think about these questions, it makes the team think quite deeply about whether they can actually answer them or not. The other thing it does is it starts to raise a lot of assumptions. So people will say things like, we'll take this card, for example, changes are promptly communicated. They might say, yes, they are. And then you ask, well, why? Or can you give an example of the last time a change was communicated? And then people start to falter a little bit and they realize that they might have a bunch of assumptions in how those changes are communicated. So as a way of exposing the assumptions you have in a team, or as a way of testing whether you've got evidence to support your assertions, it becomes a really powerful tool. The other thing that's quite interesting with this is, let's say we have achieved a given state. Let's say stakeholders is quite comfortably in agreement. Everybody's happy with that. If we come back to this game in, say, 6 weeks or a quarter, it might be the case that we're still in agreement, but do you know what? It doesn't take very long just to read back these 3 earlier cards and to say, let's just double check we've still achieved recognized, represented, and involved. Because what if we haven't? So this is a real example where a project I worked on, luckily it wasn't one I was responsible for, where they were quite far through an endeavor and one of their stakeholders had changed and they hadn't realized. What ended up happening was the strategy shifted a little bit. They worked towards the old strategy, they delivered, and nobody could use the product. If they had done this, even if they just did it every 6 months, just going through these and being honest about yourself and saying, have we identified all our stakeholder groups? Are they all represented? That second point, key stakeholder groups represented, they would have looked at that and realized that was false because the person that represented the board had left and the new person that was on the board was not represented in this project's governance at all. So just this simple game applied throughout an endeavor starts to expose that kind of risk. And that's what makes state progression and achieving states and recording that a good leading measure, because in this example, that's a good leading measure that we might have problems with our endeavor, our project, because the stakeholders have changed. Even if it hasn't actually caused a problem yet, that's a really good leading indicator. So that's our first game. Really simple. You can download the cards, you can use the mural board, you can make it shorter by considering fewer alphas, and even with the whole 7, this game is comfortably played in less than an hour, so it doesn't take an awful lot of time, but it's a really good one. Learn from this are letting, this is about letting the team work out for themselves where they are. It's a self-organizing game. You don't need to lead them through it. As I say, it helps raise assumptions that you're making and helps expose them, and you can test them, and it helps you search for evidence to support these assertions that the checklists are being made. In terms of helping your team, it's allowing them to make decisions for themselves, and it's supporting that self-organizing, but also the mastery. From a leadership point of view, you're asking some really important questions, but you don't have to do that yourself. So it helps you put in place some of that servant leadership that you might be trying to do. Okay, any thoughts on that? Any questions? Anything in the chat? Not yet. Okay, cool.
So Simon, you could also explain that once you have identified where you are, you can also use this card to describe where you want to go. Maybe you have. Yes,
that's true. So this game you can play. There's almost sort of four levels to it. So if I use you don't worry what the cards are, but if where we are is in this second state, we want to achieve this next state. These states are states we've not yet achieved. We might actually decide that final state, and the best one for this actually is software system. The last state in software system is retired. It might be that this team is not responsible for taking the software system into retired. So we can say, which states do I not care about? So this gives me an idea of what I've achieved, what I'm working on next, where I'm going, and what's not my responsibility. So it gives you quite a clear view of your kind of roadmap of state achievement. And then if you end up with, say, all 7, with somewhere that you could move to next, you might want to prioritize it. You also find sometimes that, for example, some are quite advanced, but others might not be. So you might find that actually, this bottom one, which is a team, it might not be there yet. And I think, well, if that's the case with this, I've done quite a lot of work on my requirements and perhaps my architecture. I've done quite a lot of work with my opportunity, and maybe I've done some work with my stakeholders, but the people doing the work haven't been seated and formed yet. So that's a very good kind of anti-pattern for agile teams. If you've got a bunch of work up front, this is showing you very clearly that the people that really ought to be involved in these activities and moving these states forward have not been involved. So we quite often see a bit of an imbalance, and then it becomes maybe we need to focus on getting 2 or 3 states achieved further down before we start further up. The other thing with this game, and we'll touch on this a bit later, is even for a team level, focusing on opportunity and stakeholders really helps the team think about their strategic alignment and really think about why they're doing the work that they're doing. And that's sometimes it's very easy for teams, especially within a big program, to just focus on their requirements and their bit of the problem and not think about why they're doing it. Asking them questions like, what state is your stakeholder relationship in and your opportunity, forces them to think about why they're here, not just what they're doing. Okay, brilliant. Now, this next example is a really quick one, and it builds on what I've just been talking about. So as we've seen with these cards, we've got a set of checklists, and really each checklist is a yes/no question. And we also have checklists not just at the alpha level, but within a practice. So when we essentialize a practice, we create checklists for the alphas, and we create checklists for any work products for their levels of detail. And again, these are closed yes/no questions. Now, as we were talking about a second ago, these questions lead to other questions. So when you think about the alphas, even just not considering the practices, there's 41 of these cards. So each of the 7 alphas has 5 or 6 states. They're really 41 cards that are giving you a particular focus on an element of your endeavor, a focus on one of the alphas and a focus on one level of its state achievement. Now, that's quite a lot of content. So that makes them really powerful aids for coaching. So if you want to be coaching your teams, or your teams are asking for coaching from you, then these cards start to become a really powerful coaching resource to help provide you prompts that might help in coaching conversations with your teams. So we're going to do a quick little exercise with that. So what I want to do is get you to think about what questions might these cards prompt you to ask if you were coaching somebody in your team. So use the chat for this. So there's 2 examples here. There's opportunity and goals. So imagine you've got a coaching relationship with somebody. They've come to you and they've said, I'd like to focus this coaching session on really understanding that we're building the right thing for the company. I think we are, but I want to build my confidence that we're not building something that is never going to be used. Now, in essence, that feels like you're testing the state of opportunity as to whether it's viable or not. So my suggestion here is, here's a set of possible prompt questions or starter questions for this coaching conversation. So what questions would that lead you to ask? What questions might you think that you could ask in your coaching conversation that would help this person build confidence in the solution for the company, or perhaps on the other side, somebody who's wanting to improve the technical quality of the product. So use the chat to tell me what you think. I'll give you a start point. So maybe on the software system one, so they might have said, I want to focus this session, Simon, on improving the technical quality of our solution. And I say, okay, great. So what I might start by saying, well, tell me about the architectural decisions that you've made. What's their quality? So here's one from Jane. Do you understand the value this opportunity is going to deliver? That's a great question. And can you quantify it? That's a nice way to think about it, because value is one of those things that is different for everybody. So there's another one, opportunity, risks acceptable and manageable. Ask the team to provide evidence they've assessed project risks, measured impact and identified mitigations. Yep. And risks for whom? Because risks, the different stakeholders will have different views of risk and different ideas, different things they care about. And maybe if we get one more. Have you tested the solution on customers to prove it's the right thing? Great question. Yeah. If your customers aren't involved early, how do you know you're building the right thing? Can you visualize the system? What are the threats, risks? Perfect. So you can see that these cards, whilst you might be heading in that direction with your questions anyway, they're quite a nice little aid memoir and a nice little source of extra prompt questions that you can bring into team meetings. The other way you can use these cards, which is quite nice, is a bit like you might use other coaching cards. So I've got a set of these cards from Jimmy Janlin, which are sort of Jimmy cards with questions like, I don't know, if you were to pick one metric or KPI that describes the performance of the team, what would that be? So you've got those sorts of things. Well, you can use these cards in exactly the same way. You could say to the team, pick a card, any card, and they pick a card which is requirements acceptable. Are we clear how our opportunity will be addressed? And there's a nice little conversation for the team to have as part of a team meeting. So it's not really how the cards were probably intended to be used, but for me, I think it's a really nice little added extra that I find really powerful. Okay, brilliant. Now, the next section, we're going to think a little bit about other uses of the Essence cards. So we're going to come into the practice stuff in a second, but as well as the normal practice cards, there's quite a lot of cards that are focused on the health checks, on values and principles. So for example, we've got the Scrum values. We've got cards that have got things like the 5 dysfunctions of team, Agile maturity, Agile manifesto things, got the pillars of Scrum, we've got 3 sets of safe principle cards with a principle on one side. And in the back, quite a lot of these cards have got this kind of happy, sad, so this last set, by the way, is with a customer who's on an Agile transformation, but they're not using, it's not technical transformation, it's not software systems. So a lot of the language in a lot of the cards doesn't really resonate with them. So one of our consultants, Richard, has created these cards, these values cards that have got language that's a lot more accessible for the customer. So you can customize a lot of this stuff. And a lot of them have got this happy, sad thing. We've got a description of the value, and we've got what's a great team feel like and what's a poor team feel like. And this gives us a really nice exercise. And it's a team values exercise, and it's about helping your team think about the values that they've probably signed up to and understand where they are with them. So we're going to use the poll for this one, but I'll show you how the exercise works. If I get rid of the, go. So what's really interesting with this one is we very often have values or principles that we expect people to just adhere to. And sometimes there's quite a lot of them. The Scrum values, there's 5, Kanban's got, is it 7 or 9? And a lot of our organizations have got, company values as well. So it's easy for them to be on a poster, but not really thought about and not really adhered to. So this game is all about adhering to those values and understanding them. So the secret sauce with this game is that it forces your team to, at the very least, read the values, and then they can start understanding them a little bit more. So when you're using Scrum, for example, this is a really good game as part of this Scrum training to get people to at least read the values and think about them. Same if you did this with Agile manifesto and Agile principles. So here we have a board. So we've got this kind of happy, sad thing. So I'm going to change the numbers a little bit. So I'm going to make this 3, not 23. Sorry, 3, and this one is going to be 5 because I'm going to run a little poll. So what I'd like you to think about, so I'll explain how the game works. So for each value or each principle, so I'm choosing the Scrum values here, and what you might choose in another context might be Spotify health checks, good for this, things like safe principles, company values, Agile manifesto values, all sorts of things like that. So we take a value and we ask the team how well they think the team is adhering to that value, how important it is to them, how well they can demonstrate it. And then you have your token and you move it to wherever you think it is. So there's also ways to facilitate this. Generally, you don't probably want to aim for team consensus. You want to see the range. It's interesting if some people think it's a very good place to be courageous and other people think it's a very poor place to be courageous. That tells you quite a lot. So let's do a little experiment then. So we're going to run a poll. I'd like you to think about the Scrum value of commitment in your part of the world, wherever you are with your teams. Now, commitment, as it says here, so this is one of the benefits of essentializing a practice, is we've taken the Scrum value of commitment and created a pattern for it and given it a description. So the Scrum team commits to achieving its goals and to supporting each other. A great Scrum team in this respect would be regularly making and meeting commitments, committing as a team to achieving our goals and supporting one another. A poor Scrum team would be not committing to anything. When forced to make commitments, we don't take them seriously and rarely meet them. So we've got this as a little reminder here. So what I'd like you to do is, Nabil's going to pop the poll up and vote where you think your team is. 1 for pretty poor, 5 for pretty awesome, and 2, 3, and 4 somewhere in the middle. So we'll leave it open for 15 or 20 seconds and see where you are with that commitment value, meeting and making commitments, achieving our goals, or is it something we shy away from? So 1 is bad and 5 is good. Okay, got another 5 seconds. Have we got some answers, Nabil?
Yeah, we have 40 answers.
Awesome.
Ready.
So let's see what the range is. So if you were imagining we were 40 people and we were, on this board, we've got a little bit of people at 1, a couple at 5. There's, a few more in the middle, 3 and 4. So we end up with a pattern like that. So we can see this as something that gives us something to talk about, either to identify things that we're proud of and want to celebrate. Maybe there's some challenges we want to address, but most importantly, something we've thought about. Just very quickly then, let's try it again, but let's pick one of the pillars. Let's say the transparency pillar. So if we just open the poll again, say what would you regard as your position on transparency, where it's the emergent process and work must be visible to those performing the work as well as those receiving the work. And we don't like to share what's going on in a bad team. We feel we're measured on, say, velocity, not results. In a great team, we're transparent about everything we do. We share the progress and the health of our work in a way that's available for all to see. And how does that look? Okay. Good, excellent. So again, we've got a nice mix, quite a lot of, try and grab the right bit, quite a lot of good transparency, and it's actually reasonably balanced, isn't it? So that's an interesting, I chose this as a particular example because I've got a little story about this, that one of the things I was running, there was about a team of about 150 engineers, and I was trying to be very agile. I was very keen on transparency and empowerment and autonomy and things like that. And I ran a poll to see how well people are coping with that. And do you want more autonomy or less autonomy? And I realized I put that in the wrong column. I'll just swap that around. And I got back an answer that was about a quarter of the people thought they had too much autonomy, about a quarter thought they had too little, and the rest were quite happy. And I think with a lot of these things, you end up with this sort of pattern, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does talk back into leadership, where you might find you need to lead these teams differently, and are you able to find ways to give those that want more autonomy a bit more autonomy, and those that want less a bit more support. But this kind of exercise with these kind of values can help you see whether you do need to adjust your leadership style a little bit and perhaps be a bit less empowering and autonomous and servant leadership with some teams or some people in your team than others, or vice versa. So with this this game, then it's really good about just getting people thinking about values. So if they are important, make them important, make people, give them some consideration. And again, with the facilitation, allowing anonymous voting, allowing people to be honest and to be comfortable being honest, and then having that conversation about introducing psychological safety and things like that is a good vector for some of that. And it's also a good introduction to some of the later exercises, which are, if I do think in our team we have a problem with, say, for example, transparency, then that might be something we can think about, what can we do about it? Okay. Now, I said at the beginning, I'm going to assume that we know all about Essence. So I'm not going to go through this picture in a huge amount of detail. I just wanted to show it to remind you that, you know, Essence is about, as Nabil said, describing practices and methods, and the way it does that is by being able to break them into different elements. So we've got alphas with states, work products that describe them. We've got activity spaces. We might have activities, got competencies and patterns. And what we find is that when we create a practice, we essentialize a practice, either we take an existing practice and analyze it to break it into these components, or we take an existing, a new practice and we create it, invent it, and building up from the Essence elements. We end up with these different combinations, and some might be all patterns. So we've got a practice called Scrum Accelerator that's all patterns. We might have some that are, you know, a few elements, and some that are a little bit more. And when we think about Scrum, so we know Scrum's got the 3-5-3, the accountabilities, the events, and the artifacts. Well, in essence, Scrum turns into 5-4-5-17. It's not quite as catchy. But that's how Scrum breaks down. So the 5 alphas are the product goal, the sprint goal, sprint, the backlog item, and then improvement. They're the 5 things that we progress, the things that we advance. The work products are the increment, the product backlog, sprint backlog, and then the definition of done. So definition of done in the Scrum guide is kind of hidden under the artifacts, but because it's a definable thing that has levels of detail, it's a work product in essence. And then we've got the 5 events. So sprint isn't an event in essence because it's an alpha, but the other event we've put in is the product backlog refinement because it still needs to happen even though it's not on a cadence. And then there's 17 patterns. So the accountabilities, the values, the pillars, also self-management and cross-functional teams make up our patterns. So Scrum, I'm not sure it's exactly 17 down here, but Scrum looks a bit like this. So it's quite a busy practice. And that's why it makes a really good example for this next exercise, because, you know, Scrum, in the face of it, is quite simple. And we know that the Scrum guide used to say Scrum is a simple to understand framework, but we also know it says that it's difficult to master. And the fact that it's got all these different moving parts kind of gives you some clue as to why it's difficult to master. So what I want to show you now is how the next 2 exercises, Essence can really help you master Scrum and help your teams get better at Scrum. I'm using Scrum as an example because it's one that most people are familiar with, but all the stuff we're talking about works just the same with any other practice. So the first exercise is about exploring that practice in the first place. And this is about really helping your team understand how well they understand Scrum and whether they're happy with that level of understanding. So this is how the game works. We have a good old-fashioned 3x3 matrix, and on across the x-axis is how well do we do the thing, and the y-axis is how valuable is the thing to us. And the things that we're talking about are the things in Scrum. So we've got on the side here all the what was it I said, 5-4, 5-17 or something, bits of Scrum, and each one, if we click on it, we can see the description of it, so it's nice and easy to remind ourselves what it is. And the purpose of this game is to map each of these things, or as many of them as are important to you, onto this matrix. So really simple game, but a really powerful game because it makes you think about each of those individual elements of Scrum and how they matter to you. So how it works is like this. So we take in product backlog refinement, and we decide how much value do we think product backlog refinement brings to our team or our endeavor or our customers. And typically I like to play this game by doing value first, because when you try to bring both axes into play at once, it can be a bit confusing. But you bring in the different things and you decide where they go. Moving them up, moving them up or down. And you can play this in a number of different ways. So again, we talked about the facilitation. So ideally, you want this to be something that everybody gets involved. So a nice way to play these games is to do them as a turn-based play. So the first person in the team chooses any one of the Scrum things, and they drag it on and they say, I think it goes here. And then either you have a conversation then, or we have a vote, and the play turns to the next person who says, well, I'm going to pick increment, and I think increment goes here. So you got a chance for everybody to get involved. And again, as a leader, it's something you don't need to actually lead, because once you've set the rules out, it becomes quite self-explanatory. So what I want to do is to just take one of these and let's just use the voting again to see where you think these things go. And the idea with this is, of course, there's no right answer. The value in all these games tends to be in A, the conversation you have as a team running the exercise, and B, the resultant depth of knowledge and the kind of introspection that you get as a result of playing the game, so you deepen your understanding of it. So let's pick something, let's say, for example, let's say product backlog refinement. So where do we think product backlog refinement goes in terms of value? Is it a very valuable thing for a Scrum team? Has it got not much value to a Scrum team, or is it somewhere in the middle? So let's do the voting again and see what you think. So again, let's say for 5, high number, high value, low number, low value. What do you think about that? So it's a nice comment from James about using digital tools like these are potentially stopping people having face-to-face conversations. I think you're absolutely right. And from a facilitation point of view, you know, that's something that you've got to try and bear in mind as a facilitator. How do you get people talking? And can you use the tool as a vector for the conversation, not the subject of the conversation? And I appreciate that some of these tools like this one, you know, where the icon goes is not the important thing. It's the conversation that's led to it that is far more interesting. But yeah, you're absolutely right, James. It's a real challenge for facilitators, isn't it? Okay, so this one is one we probably do want to get some sort of consensus on. So we've got a mix of 1 to 4 or 5. So probably the consensus somewhere around there. And you know, for Rail, you'd be interested in why some people, 10% of you, felt it was really not that important. It might be that you're a really agile team and the backlog is live and it doesn't need to be refined. Or it might be that backlog refinement is just too difficult because you've got 2,000 items on it. Who knows? And then the second part of the game is to say, okay, for product backlog refinement in our team, how well do we do it? And this is, again, is why it's helpful to do this game in 2 parts, because if you do run out of time, the things you want to have prioritized, understanding how well you do them or not, are the things that bring higher value. So there was a little bit of method in the madness. So let's run the poll again quickly. So for product backlog refinement, what do you think how well is it done in teams that you're familiar with? Okay. So that puts us somewhere in the middle, something like that. So that's a nice bell curve there, isn't it? So clearly how this game evolves is we take the different things, and I'm going to fairly randomly pop these onto the board. So you end up having things dotted around the board that start to give you a bit of a pattern. And clearly, you know, in the pattern, you can then start to think about how you prioritize. So the danger area is things that are valuable, we don't do very well. it's always important not to forget this top right bit. Things that we do well and are important, let's celebrate that. And retrospective is about encouraging the things that we do well and reinforcing them, as well as picking things that we should improve. But it does give us an idea of there's things that we probably ought to look at before others, and things that are we don't find valuable. Let's see, we've got that in twice for some reason. Never mind about that. In practice, so things like maybe the definition of done might be something people tend to ignore a little bit. For things that are not valuable, especially with Scrum, it's definitely worth a conversation as to why you think they're not valuable. And the other one you often find somewhere down this sort of section, bottom left, is product goal. People haven't really got used to product goal yet, I don't think. But that's interesting. Scrum makes things immutable for some reason. So if they think it's important to do and you don't, that's an interesting position. So good to understand that. So that's how that game works. It's a nice interactive game. You can play it obviously in real life with sticky notes. And even though this is an Essence board, you can play this with any practice. What Essence does really well, and what this really highlights as a real benefit of Essence, is that because it's broken the practice into these different elements, it makes it really easy to focus on one bit and really understand it, and making separate decisions about different bits of a practice in terms of how well you run it is really powerful. Got a question here from Spencer about when would you use this tool in a project lifecycle? This is a really good tool to use if at any point you think our practice isn't working well for us, especially if you get to the point where you think we should ditch this and try something else. So any team that comes to me and says, we don't think Scrum's working, let's try Kanban, or we don't think Kanban's working, let's try Scrum, this is a really good game to play just to see why it's not working. And it might be that the other approach is better for them. It might be that the real reason is because there's bits of Scrum that are important that they're not doing very well, or bits of Kanban they aren't doing very well. The other time this is really good is for people that are new to the team or new to Scrum. So really thinking through, because it's a lot to take on. If you go and do a Scrum course, yeah, you do 2 or 3 days of study, and there's a lot to remember and a lot to start doing, and to think that you start doing it and start doing it well is it's quite a delusion. So inevitably teams will have things to do better or worse, and often they don't realize that, so they have a bit of a blind spot. So any new team that's begun for a bit, just as a nice test, are we still doing as well as we thought we did? Any team that changes, especially if there's some substantial change, maybe in the team membership or perhaps in the work. So it's quite useful. And again, you can run this game in half an hour, 40 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of time. Or you could take it as a little bit through retros. Just one, do two elements in 5 minutes. Okay. One more quick game. And this is the logical extension to the game we've just looked at. We've got some stuff in that top left corner that we think is valuable, but we're not doing very well. What now do we do about it? So this is about inspecting and adapting, not just your whole practice, but you can narrow down just on a part of your practice. And this is, again, really reinforcing that valuable bit of Essence, which is the fact that you've been able to shatter practice into its different bits, and then you can focus on just some at a time. So this one is a practice spotlight, and the way that it works is like this. So I might do this for several elements. So I might have a backlog of elements that I want to understand better, or I might just be doing it for one. And the way it works is you take your element, in this case, the sprint retrospective, and you say, this is what I'm going to put a spotlight on. I've decided I want to improve on how my retrospectives run for whatever reason. It might be because that exercise before told me they were important and my team don't think we're doing them well. It might be because we just do this periodically. Every quarter we pick another event and we see how well can we do it, can we improve? And the way this works is really quite nice because it gives people a multiple set of perspectives to think about how we can affect our retrospective, our element under the spotlight. So what we've got around the outside are all the rest of the Scrum practice. So we've got all the values, we've got the pillars, we've got the accountabilities, the product owner, Scrum Master, and developers, and we've got the other events, the work products, and the alphas. Because any of those might have a relationship, and probably does have a relationship, with sprint retrospective, and that relationship might be healthy or it might not, and that relationship might reinforce the positives that I want to achieve in my retrospective, or it might hinder them. Now, I've given an example here with respect, because one of the other things that this exercise is brilliant for is where your value is in the center of the spotlight. So you take respect or courage or commitment or something, you know, from your organization, and you say, what do the elements of Scrum or my practice, how do they relate to reinforcing or undermining that value? But even with the retrospective, we can see that, you know, what's the relationship that respect has with the retrospective? Well, maybe we show respect in the retrospective by listening to one another. Maybe we have a rule, a team charter that says there's no bad suggestions, but actually maybe there's some bad things. You know, maybe if in a retrospective we commit to things we've no intention of doing, well, that's not very respectful. Or perhaps, you know, say we pay lip service to ideas. So you can show negative and positive things. And the positive things might be things you are doing, but it might be things that if you did, your retrospective would be more effective. So let's just think about this a little bit more. So let's pick another bit of Scrum that might have something to do with our retrospective. So let's pick, for example, let's pick sprint planning. So if we take sprint planning, what do you think in the chat might be things that you would, what's the relationship between sprint planning and sprint retrospective? That's the question. And how might you reinforce that or make that relationship better? How could your planning make your retrospective better? Any ideas? If you prefer to unmute then and shout out, that's okay as well. Clear sprint goals, excellent. Because if your goals aren't clear, how do you know if you've achieved them? And how do you know you can, what to improve? Explicit modeling. Yeah.
Sorry, Simon, I was replying to Jason when he was saying observer behaviors. I was saying why I think this is really powerful, because it's much more explicit than, sorry.
No, that's good. Any other things that, or things that sprint planning could do that would make your retrospective poorer? I mean, so there's maybe a timing thing. Maybe if you retrospect, if it's too soon after, you don't get time to think. But you know, the idea is that you've got all these different vectors that you can think about what you can do to pushing content rather than pulling. Yeah. So again, this exercise, you can run in a number of ways. You can run it concurrently. So people can, you know, brainstorm ideas on the board at the same time, and then you can reflect on them and, you know, discuss them and so on. Another example here, product backlog refinement and the team being on the same page in terms of following the process. Yeah, reviewing velocity, not acting upon it. That's a great one. And whether velocity, you know, if you're using velocity in your sprint planning, you really ought to be including that in your retrospective, shouldn't you? No room for improvement actions. That's a brilliant one. Yeah, yeah, I'll write that down. So we'll put velocity here and improvement actions. And actually prioritization of improvement actions as well as no room. You know, sometimes in no room, there's always room, right? But only if you prioritize them. Okay, cool. So you get the idea of that. That's some great suggestions. Thank you very much. So where we are now is pretty much at the end. So we've talked through 5 different ways that you should be able to put these things into action. So you could run those health checks, you could use the cards for coaching, you could run that values game, you could explore your practice and how well you do it, and you could pick an element that you're you want to improve, and you could use the essence relationships and the essence elements to help you focus on that event or artifact in a different way. So hopefully at least one of those things, if you wanted to, you could pick up and use tomorrow, especially when I find the right link for the template for the mural, not for the membership of it. And we have looked a little bit about how we can keep reinforcing that learning cycle. So in each of those games, when I was playing them, and if you're playing them in person, this is true as well, you have the essence cards. So you've got, effectively you have the thing you should have learned right in front of you. It's there, it's reinforcing. It's also encouraging you to adapt it and encouraging you to consider whether you're applying it well. So it helps bring you around that learning cycle as you're going through your delivery cycle. And in particular with the facilitation, you know, allowing you to build up better examples of stepping back and applying servant leadership, or providing opportunity to get your team aligned with the strategy, especially with thinking about opportunity and stakeholders. And with all these improvement games, that's really playing into the mastery in intrinsic motivation. I'm not saying that just playing these games will make you a great leader, but they certainly give you opportunities to demonstrate stronger leadership for Agile teams. So there we are. That's a whistle-stop tour. Each of these things, you know, we could do a lot more effort on, and in fact we do. So we have a course that we run called Better Scrum Through Essence, which is a 3-day course, which takes you through this in a lot more detail, gives you a lot more chance to get your hands on and actually practice it. And it gives you, if you're a Scrum Master or coach or a leader, it gives you a really great toolkit of things like these games that you can apply in lots of different situations. It also gives you really good grounding in essence and understanding essence and the ability to be able to start thinking about composing practices together and things like that. So there's a bit more detail to this if you want it, but hopefully I've managed to give you a bit of an insight. And then if you have any questions, we'll find I'll stop sharing and I'll find a link for the course. But yeah, it's on in 21st of May, I think. And I should get the mural link as well.
Yeah,
if anybody wants to, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that course has got a really fantastic testimonials that you can look at our website. So, and this is an extract of that course with. That's correct, Simon. This is the kind of
it's a brand new creation for tonight. You're all very special, but yeah, it's based on some of the things we do in the course.
Yeah. Okay. So, and if you for any reason would like to have more contact with us, you're more than welcome. Interest is great.
There's a question in the chat about, is there a link to the course or how can it be accessed?
Yes, I shall find your link. I'm trying to find the link to the template as well. I've realized my mistake. Here we go. My mistake was I opened it as a new one rather than, right, so share this link to bring the people to the template. Create link, copy link. Right, so here's the template for the mural, which has got versions of those games that if you want to play tomorrow, then you can. And we'll find the course. Any other questions? Any thoughts, any feedback? Does it feel like these are things that you could find valuable with your teams?
There is one question in the chat so far. Johan, you asked the question. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm curious about Jürgen Appello's unfixed model, where he unfixed safe and less and other things. I haven't seen it a lot. I just found it this week, but I'm quite familiar with Management 3.0. And I see similarities between Essence and his thinking. Do you have any comparisons or things like that?
you know, that was on my list of things to read out, because I saw something on the unfixed thing this week as well. So I don't know it well enough to be able to comment, I'm afraid, but a lot of the things in Management 3.0 and a lot of what I've seen Jürgen talk about before, it's along the same sort of lines, the same kind of mindset. So I'd imagine there's quite a lot of similarity. The other one that's similar, which we heard from a few weeks ago, is Heart of Agile. And with Solly talk about that. And part of what we talked about today, which I didn't mention, I meant to, was this going around the learning loop multiple times. That's really core to the kind of Chuhari approach of become good at something and keep repeating it, and don't assume that learning it once is sufficient, which feels like kind of learning organization stuff as well. But I'm afraid I can't give a better answer